On Saturday, 13,000 Ukrainians fled cities under attack using so-called green corridors. But Ukrainian officials say that still no one has been able to get out of Mariupol, the southeastern city besieged by Russian forces. The number of Ukrainian refugees who've escaped the country is now close to 2.7 million people. Joining me now is Congressman David Cicilline of Rhode Island. He is the chair of the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee, a member of the Judiciary and Foreign Affairs Committees, and the chair of the LGBT Equality Caucus. Congressman Cicilline, welcome back to the Sunday Show.
Good to be back.
You recently were at the Ukrainian-Polish border. Could you describe the conditions that you saw?
Yes. We were at the largest border crossing on the Polish-Ukraine border in Medke. And, you literally see thousands and thousands of people, crossing the border, mostly women and children, and many who have just said goodbye to their dads or husbands or fathers. So obviously very distraught. It was freezing cold, even a little bit of snow. Many folks didn't even have jackets. They're carrying literally one bag or sometimes one suitcase of all of their belongings. And it's really an unspeakable human tragedy. You can see the anguish and fear on the faces. There wasn't a dry eye in our whole delegation. It was really hard to see. The Polish people, the Polish government, the border guards were doing a miraculous job of welcoming these refugees, cooking food right on the border, making sure they had a hot meal after a difficult journey, clothing. There were lots of volunteers there helping with children. But you can just see, thousands and thousands of people who are being forced to leave their own country, to leave their homes because of this brutal, unprovoked, illegal, violent invasion of their country, and wondering whether they'll see their loved ones again, whether they'll be able to return to their country. It was really, really heartbreaking, something I had never seen before.
Congressman, were you able to talk with any of the refugees? I'm wondering what they were telling you or members of the delegation.
Yes, we had the opportunity both right at the border, but also at a welcome center some distance away where people who didn't have a place to go were temporarily housed. And, they described the really harrowing experience of leaving their country and leaving behind people they love. They were very grateful for the support of the United States and the rest of the world in this effort, and urged us to continue to support Ukraine in every way that we could. And we made that assurance, of course, that we and all of our allies would continue to do everything we can to help them in this fight for their own democracy. I was in Ukraine 3 weeks before that, and the Ukrainians told us then, we are going to fight for our country. We have tasted freedom and democracy. We are never going back. And person after person told us, we will remain and fight and die if we have to for our freedoms. And that's playing out every single day in this war.
Congressman, before I get to what the United States is going to do to help the refugees specifically, I would ask you about reports that we've seen both on television and in print about mistreatment of non-white people trying to leave Ukraine. Can you tell me, did you discuss this with Ukrainian officials and Polish officials, and what did they say in response?
Yes, we did. We asked them very directly about those reports. They made it very clear that there had not been, in their assessment, any widespread discrimination against anyone. They acknowledged in the very beginning of the conflict that there was not explicit direction from the Polish government about entry, and so they issued almost immediately a directive that everyone should be permitted to enter regardless of nationality, ethnic origin, et cetera, so that it was very clear that they wanted to ensure that everyone who sought to cross the border could. And they said since the issuance of that explicit directive, they had had no reporting of that kind of discrimination. There was also a suggestion that some stuff had been produced later on as Russian propaganda. We had no way to verify that, but they assured us that that was no longer an issue.
And so, Congressman, we've been reporting 1.7 million of the 2 million plus Ukrainian refugees leaving the country have gone into Poland. What is the will the United States accept Ukrainian refugees? When might that be? And two, I know you mentioned a moment ago U.S. funding, but can you talk specifically about that?
Yes. So the United States has approved about $15 billion in economic, humanitarian, and military assistance to Ukraine this year, and we just did a big bulk of it this past week. We have USAID and other humanitarian organizations on the ground helping the Polish people and the Polish government, but I really want to acknowledge again the extraordinary work they're doing. The same kind of refugee challenges now happening in Moldova, Romania, other parts of the border. We have to, along with our European allies, do everything we can to support those countries who are doing this work and be sure they have the resources necessary to continue to provide humanitarian assistance. The United States, I introduced legislation to provide temporary protective status to Ukrainians that are in the United States so they could stay here. The president then did an executive order doing the same thing, so that problem has been solved. I'm now circulating a letter asking the administration to raise the refugee cap specifically for Ukrainians. But let's be clear, Ukrainians want to go home. You know, they'll make life mostly in Europe until then because that's where their families are. It's easier for them to get back. But obviously, the United States has to be prepared to do our part in welcoming refugees, and I know America will. But the real solution is to end this war, to end this carnage so Ukrainians can return to their democracy and rebuild their country.
Congressman, we have less than a minute left, but there are reports, and we were talking about this with Clint Watts earlier, about the potential of Russia using chemical weapons as part of a false flag operation, but using chemical weapons against the Ukrainian people as a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. What should the United States and the West's response be to something that horrific?
Well, look, this war begun by Vladimir Putin, again, completely unprovoked, has violated so many of the rules of military conflict. He's committing war crimes, bombing children's hospitals and residential neighborhoods. The use of chemical weapons, likewise, would be a complete violation of international law. And like every decision, we would have to gather with our European allies, our NATO partners, and the Ukrainians and figure out what can we do to ensure that Vladimir Putin pays a severe cost for any such use of chemical weapons. But as he escalates his military operation, I think the whole world, the whole civilized world, is going to continue to do everything we can to make sure he pays the highest price imaginable and force him to stop this violent and brutal invasion of a democratic and sovereign country.
Congressman, if he does use chemical weapons, should the response from the West be a military one?
You know, I think the president is trying to avoid a direct military engagement between NATO and Russia that would constitute the Third World War. And that's why I think the position is we have to do everything short of that. But the use of chemical weapons is going to make that even harder. But I think, we have to balance. We want to be sure we're doing everything we can to support the Ukrainians and hold Vladimir Putin accountable without being responsible for the start or contributing to the start of the Third World War. So that's the tough balance. But his use of chemical weapons will change that calculation again and will require us to do, as we have done throughout this conflict, work with our European partners, our NATO allies, and the Ukrainians to be sure that we are united in a strong, swift, and meaningful response.
Congressman David Cicilline of Rhode Island, thank you very much for coming back to the Sunday Show.